Several years ago, I made quite a few trips to University of Beijing, and when they were making their transition and opening up to the world, I had some very profitable discussions and conversations with the students in the business community about business ethics, and so I would love to talk to you about that subject. And I think for our introduction and foundation, I want to go back to 2002. If you would have picked up that year Time magazine, you would have seen on the cover that they called that year the Summer of Distrust. And the reason for that is that was just following all of the corporate scandals and the things that were happening in large companies that had created a great matter of distrust among them and their employees and their customers. And all I really have to do is just say one word, Enron, and all of you immediately connect with the fact that that was a difficult time because what we said we were as far as companies is not what we were at all. And in our purpose statements, our values statements, our vision statements, the things that we proclaimed that this is us and this is who we are, we found that wasn't true, that there was a lot of abuse to people, a lot of manipulation of people. And for a period of time, corporate America had a very difficult time of people just really trusting them and what they said. Now, it was during that time that I was invited by Time Warner. They were my publisher during that period. They invited me to come to New York City, and Larry Kirschbaum, the head of Time Warner, as far as the book division, sat down with me and he said, "John, I want you to write a book on business ethics." And so we started discussing it, and of course we discussed what I've just shared with you. And I said to him, I said, I can't write a book on business ethics. And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because there's no such thing as business ethics." And I could see that threw him a curve, and he started going back to all the illustrations again, Enron, et cetera, and trying to run it by me again. I said, no, I understand all the problems. I got that. But I said, I can't write a book on business ethics because there's no such thing. I said, let me explain to you this way. There's just ethics. You either have ethics or you don't. And if you have ethics, it works in business. Oh, happy day. But it also works in all of your relationships. It works in your family. It works in your community. It works down at the PTA. It works at the club. There's no such thing as business ethics. It's just ethics. We can't compartmentalize. I mean, we can't say, well, I have ethics in business, but I don't have ethics with my family. I mean, you can't go doing that. There's just ethics. And then he asked me, he said, well, okay. He said, I got that. He said, can you write a book on ethics? And again, I said, I don't know. I really don't know. And the reason I hesitated there was because if you write a book on ethics, you've got to depend on something to be reliable that's truth. And in a culture that doesn't always have absolutes, how do you define truth, and how do you get a foundation to build anything on? So I sat down with my writing team, and we spent about a month working through could I write an ethics book in kind of a culture that didn't have truth or boundaries or absolutes, and we came up with the conclusion that I could. And so I wrote a book based on the Golden Rule, okay? And basically the Golden Rule is treat others as you want to be treated. And the reason I knew I was safe with that is every religion in the world has the Golden Rule. We did a lot of research, and every culture has basically a Golden Rule principle in it. So I wrote the book on ethics based on the Golden Rule, and that is basically just treating others as you want to be treated, because ethics is all about doing the right thing regardless of the situation. And we had to have some kind of a North Star. We had to have some kind of a guide that would help people kind of say, okay, I think that I want to do the right thing, and I want to treat you as I would want to be treated. Social trust is the fact that people will do what they ought to do. Social mistrust is people won't do what they ought to do. Now, that was life-changing, Dr. Jones, because it was at that time that I realized that that the importance of values, the golden rules of value, and I began to in leadership, began to write leadership and began to teach leadership based on values. I'm known for the statement, everything rises and falls on leadership. It's very true. Well, there's the positive, everything rises, and there's the negative, everything falls. And it's a result of either good leadership, which causes it to rise, or bad leadership, which causes leadership to fall. And so when we ask ourselves what allows leadership to bless people and add value to people and make a difference to people, and what allows leadership to rise, it's two things. It's competence, and it's good values. And you can't substitute one for the other. You could be very competent but have poor values in your life. In other words, you know how to lead, but what do you do with your poor values? You manipulate people. That's always wrong. And so it's not like, and by the way, you could have good values but not have leadership skills. So the good news is everybody loves you and values you, but you can't lead them anywhere. So when we talk about everything rises, it has to be competence and it has to be on good values. That's what allows leadership to rise. Well, the opposite is also true, that when leadership falls, when a community doesn't do well because of bad leadership, it's almost always because of incompetence and bad values. I spent a lot of time in the Eastern Bloc of Europe, and in fact, when the Soviet Union fell in the 90s, they asked me to come to the Kremlin, and I went to the Communist Palace. I spoke to 5,000 leaders basically in the Communist Party about the change that was about to happen, and it was a lesson about values, and that the success of their transition was going to be based upon how much they valued people. That was the foundation. How much do you value people? And when you think of ethics, the core of ethics is based upon valuing people. I will be an ethical person. I'll do what I ought to do as a leader to you and for you if I value you. But if I don't value you, if I devalue you, then I'm not going to be ethical towards you. They run together. You can't say, well, I devalue people, but I'm very ethical. And if you truly value people, you wouldn't be unethical. They always have to go together. And so when I'm talking about, I can still remember being in Ukraine and getting ready to speak to 15,000 people, and my translator and I were in the green room, and he was talking about the fact he was excited about interpreting for me, and he'd read a lot of my books, and he was just a lovely person. But maybe 5 or 7 minutes before I went out, he said, there's one thing I think you need to know before you go out and speak to these people, and that is, he said, you talk a lot about how leaders add value to people. He said, you're going to go talk to 15,000 people, and if you say that, they're not going to understand you at all, because the only leadership they've ever known devalued them and didn't add value to them at all. And he said, I just want you to know that you don't want to go out and lead with that, or else you're going to lose them in the very beginning. And then he left the room for a moment. I thought, wow, I'm glad he told me that 6 minutes before I go out and speak to 15,000 people. In fact, I went out that day, and the way I approached that beginning was I asked him, I said, how many of you have ever had a leader that did something wrong to you? And every hand went raised up. I said, "How many of you don't trust leaders?" And every hand went raised. And it was. And then I said, "Well, I'm going to talk to you about how to change that. I'm going to talk to you about how to become a leader that people can trust." And then, of course, I can talk about the golden rule. I can talk about values. I can talk about ethics. This is really important, and I don't want us to miss this, Because I think in reality, we're seeing a lot of this happening in our country right now. I think a lot of the division is based on the fact that we don't value diversity. The division is based on the fact that we don't value people of different opinions. And instead of having maturity and being able to see things from more than our own personal perspective, we're very kind of immature, to be honest with you. And we see things from our perspective. And if you don't agree with me, then you're wrong and you're on the other side and you're the enemy. And anybody knows that leadership doesn't work that way. In fact, bad leadership unites its enemies and divides its friends. And this, I see this happening right now. Instead, good leadership, unites the friends and divides the enemies. And I see this happening right now. And so as I'm talking to you today, I'm really talking to you about an issue that I think that we have right in front of us today in our culture of again, going back to a value such as the golden rule and treating others as we would really like to be treated ourselves. So the question is, if leadership falls because of lack of competence and a lack of valuing people and a lack of having good values, how do leaders get there? How do leaders become unethical? How do they manipulate? I mean, what causes them to manipulate people? What causes them to devalue people? What happens? It's a great question. And I think that there are several reasons. I'm going to give you a few real quickly. Selfishness. I think when leaders are self-serving, which many leaders are, they're into it for what they can gain out of it for themselves. They put themselves before the people. That's very common in leadership. Well, I think that's then they become unethical. Because they begin to look at the people, instead of saying, I'm here to serve the people, we begin to think that the people are here to serve us. I think another reason is power. I think power has a tendency to corrupt people. I think even people that start out well, they get power, and all of a sudden they begin to, again, change the way they lead. And instead of having a heart to help and add value to people, they now use that power to gain for themselves. When I travel internationally, I do this quite often. When I'm in a private conversation with the president of a country or a prime minister, and I wait till all the handlers are gone and all the pictures are taken, and it's just maybe the two of us in a room, I lean into them and I say, I have a question I want to ask you, and the question I want to have to ask you is, when you're finished leading the country, will the people be better off than they are now? In other words, will you have added value to the people? Will they look at you and say, that leader really lifted me and helped me? Or are you going to be better off than you were when you started, and the people are not going to be as well off? I mean, talk to me about this. And I always engage them in a conversation of why you lead, because I think why you lead is an ethics issue. I mean, if I lead because of perks, I mean, I lead because I get a corner office, I lead because I get a parking place, I lead because I get to be in control, get to be the boss. There's too many leaders, that's why they lead. And we should lead not out of reward. We should lead out of responsibility. We should lead out of the fact that we have been given leadership gifts and opportunities to help people get better and improve their lives. And it should always be the people first. And so I think selfishness, power, I think pressure. I think pressure causes us to be unethical. I was playing golf the other day with Ed Bastian, the CEO of Delta Airlines. And we were talking about values, and he's done such a great job during a very adverse time for the travel industry, period, of holding steady and keeping values, not changing those values during a difficult time. And so we were talking about it, and Ed said to me, John, when a crisis comes, it's too late to develop your values. It's too late to say, oops, I've got to go get some values in my life. You better have them before that. A crisis doesn't, people say, well, crisis makes a person. No. It reveals a person. I mean, during this crisis, what we're seeing more than anything else is we're separating the players from the pretenders. Because during a difficult time, that's when the leader either shows up or has to sit down. And it goes back to the fact that you become unethical if you don't have that inner core, that inner value that allows you to stand during that test of time. And I also think one more thing I just have to say about how leaders sometimes become unethical, and that is in a culture of relativism, where nothing is absolute and nothing is true. You show me relativism and I'll show you a person that becomes mostly ethical. And mostly ethical just means that when things are going good and my way, I'm very ethical. I'll do the right thing. But you just let the pressure come or you let adversity come, and because there's no absolute, there's nothing that I have to stand on, there's no declared truth, then, it's okay. I don't have to always be ethical. And that, of course, that's just, as you know, that's a slippery slope. So when I think of ethics, there are two important issues, I think, with ethics that you just need to make sure you have. And number one is you have to have a standard to follow. We've talked already about that, the golden rule. And it's a standard that we say, okay, this is how we should behave. This is what we ought to do. And again, it works because all religions, all cultures have a golden rule. So it's basically, we all buy into the fact that we should treat others as we would like to be treated. Now, there are a few exceptions, but most people, they buy into that. That's a standard to follow. But ethics goes more than just having a standard to follow. It also insists that we have a will to make it happen. In other words, it's one thing to say, okay, we have a standard, the golden rule, but where is the personal will that I say, I'm going to make sure that I treat others as I would like to be treated? I mean, after all, is somebody policing this? And so it's one thing to know what is ethical and what is right. It's another thing to do it. Hey, there are a lot of things that we know that we don't do. Come on, let's be honest. And so we have to be able to know it, but we also have to be able to do it. Let me give you a great story, I think, that would just help us in this area. Jim Blanchard is a friend of mine, and for, I think, 30-plus years, he was the CEO of Synovus. And Synovus, when he was the CEO, almost every year was in the top 10 companies in America that people wanted to work for. It was a very admired company, and people had a golden rule culture about it, and people loved to work there and loved the people that they worked with, and so in fact there were I think 2 or 3 years that Synovus was the number one company that was voted the best company to be a part of and to work for. What I want you to catch is, that just didn't happen automatically. Remember, we need to have a standard to follow, but we need to have the will to make sure that we come up to that standard. And Jim Blanchard, when he became the CEO of Synovus, very quickly realized that many of the supervisors didn't treat the people well. So he kind of, took a few months to look around and ask questions and observe. And he came to the conclusion that many of the leaders, the supervisors at Synovus, didn't treat others as they would want to be treated themselves. So he called together a meeting. I think they had maybe a little bit over 3,000 employees at that time. And he shared with the whole company his observation that some of the supervisors perhaps weren't treating people right. And so now this is the will, the personal will to make sure that you can follow through on that standard that you proclaim on. Hey, it's Enron had the standard to follow, they just didn't have the will to do it. Well, so here comes Jim Blanchard, and he says, okay, this is a golden rule culture, and we're going to create it here, and we don't have it yet. And he said, I'm the leader, so I'm going to make sure that we change. And then he did something really, really bold. He pulled out a cell phone and he gave everybody his cell number. He said, I want you to write this down. This is my cell number. This doesn't come to my assistant, my executive assistant. This comes to me. And here's what I want you to do. If in this company you're not treated correctly with a supervisor, you just call me. You give me your name and you tell me who your supervisor's name is and you tell me what happened. And he said, I personally will go to unearth what the truth is there, and I'll go to that supervisor and we're gonna talk about this issue. He said, just call me. He gave that phone number up. He said, John, he said, literally for the next month, he said, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of phone calls. In fact, he said there were times when I thought, what in the world did I, was I crazy or something? I gave out my cell number and these people are calling me. But he said, we were diligent. We followed up on every reported abuse, misuse of people. And he said we found out that a lot of them were very valid. And he said we sat down with the supervisor. We basically said, let's talk about this. And we got to correct this. You need to go to that person. You need to ask forgiveness. You need to change in your behavior. And he said, in 3 months, everything began to change. Now, he said, we paid a price for that. He said, the price we paid is, I think he said, that in 1 year's time that they let a third of the supervisors go. But he said, John, within a year, we had a golden rule culture. We had ethics. We began to develop an atmosphere that was an environment that's just conducive for growth and for good business. And it was just huge. It was just huge. Well, it's a perfect example of not only having a standard, but a will. It goes back, when I wrote the ethics book, by the way, it's still in print if you want to get it. But when I wrote this book, I got interviewed by, the Wall Street Journal, Chicago Times, some of the major places. And one of the questions they asked me is because this book kind of stimulated, they instituted business ethics. And so the question was asked to me, do you think it's good that schools are teaching business ethics? I said, I think it's wonderful that they're teaching business ethics. And said, will that ensure that we develop a culture of kids that come out of the universities with good ethics? And I said, well, it ensures that they know what real good ethics are. But I said they still have to have a will to follow up, and so it's like the laws of the land. You can have good laws in the land, but if I want to get around the law, I'll find a way to do it. That's why, by the way, that's why values are much more important than laws. A law you can break if you really want to break it, but if you have good values, if you're right on the inside, you just aren't going to do wrong on the outside. And so when we base this on the golden rule, it really worked. It really worked. And I hope in a moment to maybe even tell you how we're working it today in nations around the world. But I began to ask myself the question, if I'm going to value people, how do I want to be treated? I mean, just go ask yourself, how do you want other people to treat you? If the golden rule says treat others as you, how do you want to be treated? Well, I listed some things right here for you. Number one is I want to be valued. In the workplace, I want to be valued. 70% of the people when they leave their job, they leave it because they didn't feel valued. It's very interesting. People get hired, people take a job because of the organization, but they almost leave that job because of a person. They join the company, okay, but pretty soon they have to work with people, and when you work with somebody that's not ethical and you don't feel valued, then you leave. So here's what I want to be valued. Secondly, I want to be understood. I want people to understand me, which means they care enough for me that they'll unconditionally love me and that they'll value me, even though always my opinions and my perspective might be different than theirs. I want to be respected. I think we all want to be respected, which is always earned. Respect is always earned on difficult ground. I love it when somebody says, well, you can always tell somebody that's immature when they say, well, I demand respect. Well, you really can't demand respect. You have to earn it. And you earn it when you do the right things, when you're ethical during times when you could have been unethical. That's how you earn respect. I want to be trusted. Wow, I want to be trusted. You want to be trusted. We all want to be trusted. This is so true, isn't it? We want to be trusted, and most of all, I don't want people to take advantage of me. I just don't want to. I want them to do right for me, and I want to do right for them.
I want to talk to you a little bit today about communication in organizations. This is something that you talk about a lot, and you talk about the power of connecting with people as they communicate. Why is that so hard for people today in organizations?
Well, I think that most of us haven't been taught to really connect and communicate with people. And one of the things I teach very quickly is that if I'm going to connect with you, the first thing I need to realize is it's really all about you. And most people, when they communicate, they're asking themselves, am I doing a good job? And, are my words right? And they're too inward focused, and they're not enough outward focused. And to help leaders in companies understand this, basically I ask them this question, that is, are you trying in your organization to add value to yourself, or are you trying to add value to your team? You see, if I'm trying to add value to you, then the first thing I know is it's about you. It's not about me. Yeah. So if I'm trying to add value to you, the first thing I have to do is I have to find you. And the way that I find you is by getting common ground. Maybe a better way to say this, Chris, is when I started off as a leader, I was very directional. I was young and I had vision and I knew what I wanted. And so I'd grab somebody like you and say, come on, Chris, get on my team. Here's where we're going to go. And to be honest with you, I didn't find you. I just kind of drafted you. And so off you are. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. And then one day I realized I needed to stop directing and start connecting. Mm. And the way that you connect with people is by asking questions.
Yeah.
And so I began to ask questions. And that's when I began to understand also that you have to find people before you lead people. So once I know it's all about you, once I know it's all about adding value to you, once it's all about me understanding and knowing you and finding you, then all of a sudden the connection begins to happen, because guess what? All of those things are all about you. They're not about me, they're about you. Leaders understand it's always about the people. Once you connect with the people, once you get buy-in with the people, everything else works.
How would you say, from a communication standpoint, in times of conflict resolution, tough conversations, how would you encourage those in organizations that are leading people to be able to have those conversations and communicate with them effectively?
Well, again, as you're asking these questions, Chris, I'm cracking up, because everything I'm teaching you now, I didn't know in the beginning. In fact, everything I'm teaching you, I learned through my failures. And this is one of those areas of which I really came up short, because being relational, if you came on my team in the beginning, Chris, in my earlier years, I wouldn't deal with tough issues with you at all. I would try to be relational enough with you that you would like me enough that I would think after a while you would just kind of automatically find your way through the landmines of the organization and come out okay. And so therefore I didn't deal with the issues. I just thought, let's just love one another and hope. Well, hope's not a strategy. So, of course, after several times of that not working, I began to say, wait a minute, John, the first responsibility of a leader, Max Dupree says, is to define reality. And reality is that if you're working together as a team, you're going to have problems. That's the reality. In fact, in our John Maxwell company, Mark Cole, who does such a great job overseeing and CEO in it and running it, one of the things he helps everybody when they come on the team is understand is very simple, and that is, in the beginning, the first conversation I have with you, I say to you, we will have tough conversations. Now, you're hoping to be hired. It's kind of a high day if you're hired, and oh my, this is all wonderful, wonderful. No, we will have tough conversation. And I think that the moment that we address it in the beginning, first of all, we're honest with people, but also when it's time to have a tough conversation, it's not personal. Because I told you we were going to have tough conversations before I ever knew you. I told you we were going to have tough conversations before you messed up. I told you we were going to have tough conversations before you didn't do what I wanted to see you do on the team. So once I set that as the precedence, and you know that we're going to have tough conversations, when I say, hey, Chris, we got to have a difficult conversation now, it isn't like, oh my gosh, I must have done something terrible. Well, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, I don't know. But here's what I know. When you preset the questions and the issues on the front end, then when you get to them, it's not awkward, and then you can deal with those issues.
Yeah. Let's talk about employee engagement, right? There's a lot of talk and studies about the lack of employee engagement in organizations, the lack of trust. From your experience and speaking with different organizations, training different organizations, helping build leadership cultures, how would you see leaders increasing the employee engagement, right? In order for us to lead effectively, we have to have engaged employees.
Absolutely.
Whether we're leading volunteers, which you talk a lot about, whether it's team members, boards, whatever it might be. Talk a little bit about trust in organizations with your leaders. Talk about employee engagement and what that looks like.
It's interesting you asked that question, Chris. I just developed a teaching called How to Be a Leader That People Love to Follow. And in that teaching, I talk about first of all, when I began to work on this lesson, I asked myself, well, what are my feelings when I look at somebody that I love to follow? When I look at them, I say, I just enjoy being on their team. How do I feel? And I came to the conclusion there are three feelings I had when I followed somebody that I loved to follow, and that is I felt valued, I felt inspired, and I felt empowered. Now, I love these three. Because what that means is the leader is setting in the culture of the company such a beautiful environment that at all times I'm feeling valued, I'm feeling inspired, and I'm feeling empowered. And when you ask that question, you're talking when you start talking about trust, that's empowerment. And what I've learned many, many years ago is that as a leader, I have a choice. I can either be a command and control leader, and basically, I've got to make sure that I run everything and I get credit for everything. And by the way, let me say, if you're a command and control leader, if you have to have control, you will limit the growth of your company because it's only a matter of time because you have to be in on every decision. Well, that begins to slow the process down. To become what I call an empowering leader. And one of the qualities of an empowering leader, Chris, is that they trust people. And I was asked this the other day. It was amusing. A person, they were very sincere. They looked at me and said, okay, well then, how can you know if you can really trust someone? Well, the way they asked the question told me I already had a problem, okay? Yeah. But how can you know that if you really can trust someone? I said, well, the only way you could know that you can really trust someone is to really trust someone. Because only when I trust you, are you going to be either proven to be trustworthy or not trustworthy? Yeah. I don't know if I can trust you until I trust you. I've got to empower you. I've got to let you have I've got to be able to delegate some authority to you. I've got to let you run at the ball. I mean, how if you're a coach, how do you know the guy is a good runner? Well, give him the ball. How do you know he can block? Well, let him block. It's in the actions of the people and their behaviors. That's why John Wooden, the great coach, would tell his players, don't tell me what you're going to do. Show me what you're going to do. But he let them show them. So empowerment is giving people a chance to prove that they're trustworthy. I love that. And then you know who you can trust. And by the way, if you have somebody you can't trust, either it's because you're command and control and haven't given them the opportunity, or it's because you got the wrong person. If you got the wrong person, you got to make that change. If it's command and control, you got to make the personal change. I want to talk to you about the best advice that I ever received. And then I want to pass it on to you if I titled this lesson. I've never done this lesson. I wrote it just for you, to be honest with you. If I entitled the lesson, I would call it the best thing you can do for yourself and for others, okay? When I graduated from college, my father, who happened to be the president of the first college I graduated from, I sat down with him. I was getting ready to begin my life, my calling. And I asked him for advice, and what he told me was the best advice I ever received, and this is going to be the core of the lesson. He said to me, John, if you want to be successful, 3 things you need to do every day. Value people, believe in people, and unconditionally love people. He said if you'll do those 3 things, you'll always have people follow you. You'll always be a person of influence, because it's all about people, and people, most of them don't feel valued. Few of them ever have anyone that really believes in them. And he said hardly anyone has anyone that unconditionally loves them. And I have taken that advice. Value people, believe in people, unconditionally love people. And in every book I write, I take it through that grid. Every teaching I take, like today, I take it through that grid. I continually remember that in everything I do and everything that I am, I value people, believe in people, and unconditionally love them. Now, my father just died July 4th of this year. He was 98 years of age. The day before he died, I was with him, just the 2 of us alone. And we spent a few hours together, and I began to talk to him about lessons that he had taught me. In fact, that day on my iPhone, I literally would put down a lesson he would teach me, and then I'd say, now, Dad, this is what you taught me, and this is how I've applied it to my life. And there were 29 lessons. The other day, I was reviewing those 29 lessons that my dad taught me, and I think it's, let me count them on my pad, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 7 of those 29 lessons were about relationships, about either valuing people, believing in people, and unconditionally loving people. And I'm going to give them to you just quickly. This is not the meat of the lesson. One of the lessons that my father taught me were things such as encourage others, walk slowly through the crowd, see the best in others, remember their names, travel the high road, express gratitude to and for others, unconditionally love them. And when I looked at these lessons that he taught me in life, what was huge was this, that he understood the value of people, and he understood how to give value to people. Now, there's a relationship, I think, between understanding the value of people and also at the same time understanding how to add value to people. I have a coaching company. It's only 10 years old, but it's now the largest coaching company in the world. I think we have like 35,000 members in about 168 countries of the world. So that's pretty fast growing for 10 years. And when we bring these coaches together every 6 months, we have these major 3-day conferences where we especially bring in new coaches, people that just signed up to be part of our team, the John Maxwell team. And we bring them together, and every time we do, every 6 months, I have this about an hour and a half lecture called JMT. That stands for John Maxwell Team DNA. And I take them through what is the DNA of a John Maxwell team member, because I want them to understand this is who we are. We are creating a culture of people that really add value to people. And the first thing I teach them is this, and I want you to catch it, that we are people of value who value people, and we add value to them. I'm a person of value, but I'm on this teaching call with you today because I value you. I value who you are, what you've done. I value Stephen. I value Erica, all the people that lead your organization. I'm a person of value that values you. So what is the best result? The best result of all of this is that I add value to you. If I value myself and I value you, there's an automatic action that I take, and that is that I value you. And the best thing that you can do for yourself and the best thing that you can do for your others is to value yourself, value people, and then add value to them. You see, I wrote another book called Winning with People. And in it, I have what I call people principles. And one of the people principles is what I call the elevator principle, which basically says we either, like an elevator, we either lift people up or we bring people down. And in fact, I could basically summarize any kind of relationship teaching in almost one sentence, and it would be something like this. You and I are either a plus in people's lives or we are a minus in people's lives. We're either adding value to them or, to be honest with you, we're taking a little piece from them. That's just the way it is. And again, this is huge, because when I think about the best thing I could do for myself and the best thing I can do for you is I can value myself and I can value you, because if I can do those two things, if I am a person of value and you're a person of value, then my next response is that I'm going to add value to you. So how do I do that? How does that happen? So let me give you just my little 5-step everyday process of adding value to people. Here we go. Number one, I value people, okay? I go back to the golden rule. Treat others as I want to be treated. So every day I make sure that the core of everything I do is based on the fact that I value people. And the reason that's so important, especially for leaders, is leaders see more than others see, and leaders see before others see. And because of that, because I see more than most people and because I see before other people, this gives me a very distinct advantage over other people. Trust me, in life, if you can see more and you can see before, you're going to win the race. So the question is, what do I do with that advantage? What do I do with the advantage I can see more and I can see before? I can either use it for personal gain or I can use it for your gain. I can either manipulate you, which means I move you for my advantage, or I can motivate you, which means I move you for your advantage and personal and mutual advantage. So I'm either going to be a plus or a minus, and I'm going to be a plus or minus with people based on the fact that I value those people. If I value you, I'm going to be a plus. If I don't value you, to be honest with you, or if I don't even value myself, I'll be a minus. I'm either adding or I'm subtracting. So every day I value people. The second thing I do every day is I think of ways to add value to people. In other words, I look at my calendar in the morning. On my calendar day in the studio, I knew I would be talking to a lifestyle publication. So what am I doing? Before I ever get here in our teaching lesson, I'm thinking of ways I can add value to you. I'm thinking ahead. I'm intentionally saying I'm going to be with you today. What can I say to you that is going to be a plus in your life, so that when I'm done, you say, wow, John just moved us a little bit further down the road. This is huge. So, when I look at my calendar, I ask myself, who will I see? Oh, I'm going to see Lifestyle Publication today. And what can I do? What can I do to add value to you? In fact, one of the things I felt that I could add value to you today was to do a kind of a unique lesson just for you, because I know how much you value people in your publication and the whole intent of why you do what you do. A few years ago, I wrote a book, Intentional Living. And we have 5 grandchildren, and I was working on teaching my grandchildren how to be intentional in adding value to people. So I was having dinner with all 5 of my grandchildren, and I was asking what they were going to do the next day at school to add value to people. And our youngest grandson, at that time, I think James was 9, said, Papa, tomorrow when I go to school, I'm going to open doors for people. If I'm near a door and people are coming, I'm going to rush ahead. I'm going to open the door. And when they pass through, I'm going to smile and I'm going to say, have a good day. I said, oh, James, I like that. The next evening, he called me and said, Papa, I had a great day. I said, well, tell me about it. He said, well, remember I was going to open doors and, tell people to have a great day. And I said, oh, yeah, I remember it well. He said, well, I did that. I did that all day. He said, I opened up 47 doors for people today and smiled and said, have a great day. Now, James is 9, and he's already learning to think ahead of how he's going to add value to people. I want to encourage all of you to look at your calendar, what you're doing tomorrow, see who you're going to see, and ask yourself a very simple question. When I'm with them, what can I do that would add value to them? Wow. Number 3, I not only value people and think of ways to add value to people. But number three, I look for ways. I look for ways to add value to them. In other words, when I'm with you, I'm constantly looking and saying, what can I do right now to add value to this individual? Wow. Because here's what I know. Who I am determines what I see. Just like who you are determines what you see. If I am a person of value who values people and wants to add value to people, guess what? I'm going to see all kinds of opportunities to add value to you. Why? Because that's who I am. I don't see what's before my eyes. There's a whole bunch of things before my eyes I don't see. I see what I'm prepared to see. And how I view others is how I view myself. Now, this is huge. So how do I do this? How do I look for ways to add value to people? Well, I love to play golf when I'm on a golf course. One of my desires is to find somebody that's working the ground. Maybe somebody's raking the traps, the maintenance people. And I intentionally separate myself from the other golfers for a moment. I go over and introduce myself, and I thank them for their hard work and how beautiful they make the course. And then I give them a financial, I just slip them some money and say, hey, take your family out to eat today. And my name's John, I'm your friend. And I move on. If I'm in a restaurant, especially if it's a single mother or if it's an elderly person, I make sure that I really, give them a great tip. In fact, during COVID-19, I just tip 50% of the meal anymore right now because I know everybody's having a very tough time. Now what I'm just saying is you want to be conscious and look for ways that you can begin to add value to the people around you. These are people I don't even know. In fact, every day I make it intentional that I give something to somebody that doesn't know me at all. I can't benefit at all from them. Okay, the first question I ask anybody that I do know is, well, how can I help you? What can I do? So every day I value people. Every day I think of ways to add value to people. Every day I look for ways when I'm with them to add value to people. And number four, every day I do things that add value to them. I not only think and look, but I actually do things. In fact, I ask myself every night, who did I add value to? And how did I add value to them? And I always have a goal, and this is a simple goal, but it's really good. I want to be the first to add value to people. When you're first, you set yourself apart from everyone else. I watch people in the crowd often hesitate, and I often think, if you wait till everybody else does something good before you do something good, it's still good, but you get lost in the crowd. Be the first to help. Be the first to add value. I try, and so I become a person of action. So when I see that there's action needed, while other people are asking themselves, well, should I do this? I've already made up my mind because I've prepared my mind. My mind has already been made up. My mentor, John Wooden, used to say, John, when opportunity comes, it's too late to prepare. So I've already made my mind. So every day I value people, think of ways to add value to people, look for ways to add value to people, do things that add value to people. And finally, number five, every day I encourage others to add value to people. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now. For all of you of Lifestyle Publications, I'm encouraging you to now begin to follow this process because it's the best thing you can do for yourself, but it's also the best thing that you can do for others. I encourage you to be a person of significance, not just a person of success. Now, success is wonderful, it's important, but success is pretty much about me. It's very personal. It's how well I do in life and how well I provide for my family and my home and it's all about me. Significance is all about others, and I want to encourage you to become a person of significance. As you're in this incredible world of publication, I want to encourage you to constantly, intentionally add value to other people. I've known a lot of successful people that were not happy, but I've never met a person that does significance, that literally pours their life into others, that they're all fulfilled. They're all having a sense of inner deep satisfaction because they know it's not about them. In fact, Stephen talked about our training of leaders around the world, and we have a fairly large international presence. And in one of my companies, one of my nonprofit organizations, we do transformation through values training in other countries. We're only going to the country when we're invited by the president. We're in 3 countries now. We're getting ready to go into 2 more countries. We have 22 presidents that have already requested us to come in to be with them. And so I take my coaches on these trips. These coaches, they pay their way because they want to add value to people. They want to do what this teaching's all about because they know it's the best thing to do for themselves, the best thing to do for others. And so we go to train these facilitators of these transformation tables. We'll go in 5 days, train 20, 25,000 facilitators. And I tell my coaches, I say, okay, now you've come to add value to people. You're living this life of significance. It's a beautiful thing. I said, but let me tell you this, by the end of the 5 days, you'll know that they added more value to you than you added value to them. While you gave yourself, while you lost yourself in them, you found yourself.
Today's topic is entitled Embedding Your Culture in a New Hire. Man, this is so important. And this part of the onboarding process, but it might be the most important part. And I know for me personally as a leader, when we bring someone on our team, I'm so excited to have someone on the team to fill that gap that I'm like, forget about all that stuff. Like, I'm ready to go level 3. Like, I need them to come and start producing. Right. And it's so important for us to be embedding this into that individual and to be embedding the culture in that. We've got to be intentional about it and how you're communicating about the culture. Because if not, what's going to end up happening is they're going to dilute it over time. And it's going to happen, especially, and we talk about this quite a bit, if that is an external candidate that you're bringing in versus an internal, which we always would love to bring up an internal candidate if possible because they get the culture. It's not always possible, especially in today's time as we are in the great resignation or the great moving around of people, and so you have people that are hiring it. So let's unpack this today for our listeners and really help them because this is super important.
Yeah, this came up from a coaching client that I've been working with for a couple of years. Chris, he's CEO of his company, and they're doing great. And so he actually did an acquisition of a smaller company, brought in some new, integrating the employees from the acquired company into his company, and which is a great story, and very proud of all he's done. But he's walking around. He practices that walking slowly among the people type of a thing. We back in the day we called it management by walking around, but it's become less cool now. But he was walking around. He saw one of the new employees doing something, a behavior that was not consistent with how they do things. And he asked the new employee, "Why did you do that?" And the employee said, "Well, at my old company, we did it this way, and I kind of like that way better." And Chris immediately knew he had a culture problem. And this is what we always worry about anytime you bring people into an existing culture that are coming from the outside. There's the potential to dilute your culture. Yeah. And people bring their own ideas, their own definitions, their own behaviors. And Chris and I started talking about, well, how do you embed your existing culture into the new people that are coming in, and you cannot take that lightly. It's got to be very intentional, or they like Chris found, people are out there doing things. What if he hadn't been walking around? Yeah. What if he hadn't seen this? It could really come off the rails.
Well, I love that he was being observant. He was walking around. Here's what else I love, and I hope listeners that you're getting this, which is, I hope you're listening to this conversation going, man, I got the same issues. I got the same because we're bringing to you what's going on in the field and what we're hearing and what Perry's coaching through and what our team's coaching and hearing. And so we know that it's just not Chris that's dealing with this, that there's many of us that are dealing with this. But man, do not take lightly that culture is happening one way or another. It's happening in your absence, and we need to make sure that how we're communicating it, that it's by design, not by fault, and then how and how often is it being communicated, because it is happening one way or another, and it's probably happening more in your absence than it is when you are walking around, leaders. So just be aware of that and make sure that this is something that you are super sensitive to.
That's something our friend Greg has taught me that I hadn't really thought about it until I heard him verbalize it. Was your culture exists in your absence.
That's right.
So what is it to do that? So the first question I asked Chris when we were having this, and I probably would ask every leader listening to us today, is how clear are you on what your culture is about. What is your culture? Could
Yeah.
you describe it? Have you done it intentionally? You were just talking about designing. You either design or you default. You always have a culture. You cannot not have
That's
a culture. So you have a culture. Did you design it or did you default to it? But maybe for those listening, and I've talked about this kind of a little model I use on. I just did it this past week. It's a fantastic exercise in a room of leaders to say, how do we design a culture? What would be the...
Yeah, let me stop just for a minute. You mentioned Greg, one of our executive facilitators and coaches, also helps us with a lot of content. Man, he really helped us with a piece that we work with on teams called 4 Dimensions of a Culture.
Right.
And what does that look like? And so again, I'm going to just refer you back to what I mentioned early on, that if you want information on that, even just visit maxwellleadership.com/podcast, and in the form, mention that, and our team will follow back up with you. It's a powerful training.
He does have a book coming out. If he ever gets it out, out published, we'll announce it here and make that available.
Yeah.
Hey, podcast listeners. Do you have a clear plan for growth? Achieving big results most often does not require big life changes. Small improvements over time compound into big results. Download the Maxwell Leadership app. It's the new free app where our expert guides and John Maxwell help you pace your leadership journey and set a clear plan for your own personal growth. You can also find all sorts of resources on the Maxwell Leadership app, including this podcast, information on upcoming events, and much more. Just search Maxwell Leadership in your app store and download the app today.
So back to your point about what is it that we're teaching or we're trying to help leaders when you want to design your culture? Here are a couple of key things that we talk about. Number one, decide on your core values. What are they as an organization? Number two, define what each of those core value means. And here's what I would also say. Keep it simple. Like, make sure that as you define them, just keep them simple for the team so that they understand it and you don't get too complex, too wordy, right?
But the magic there, what I learned was, if you say we have a core value of respect for others, you have to define that, because what you think respect for others means, what I think respect for others. So I think that's what the definition step was so important, is the team, you that's what the design part is. You say what it means so that nobody you're not free to make up your own definition of respect.
Yeah. And not only that, then how do you attach maybe some behaviors, right, that are to that definition of what that looks like. The fourth thing, which the third thing was the behaviors, the fourth thing is catch people exhibiting those behaviors. And that's what I love about what Chris is doing, right? He's managing by walking around, so he has the opportunity to catch that. And then finally, capture stories of where people exhibited the behaviors of those core values. And not only capture them, but then talk about them and share them. And make sure as you're doing this that you're using the core value as the example and the main point of the story. And oh, by the way, thanks, Perry, for doing that. Don't necessarily lead with the individual and then talk about the core value. Make the core value the main part of that story.
Oh, the stories are so important, because this is how it becomes part of your history about what are we expecting to see? Hey, this is what we saw. I love it when we start a team meeting and like 2 minutes of the team meeting as we start the meeting are, hey, I just want to mention an observation made last week. I saw Chris and how he exhibited our core value of respect for others. What I saw Chris do was this, and then you move on with your team meeting, but you're letting people know that this is not a poster on a wall someplace. These are things we are living out. And it can become a part of your onboarding when you say, here are our core values, here the definition of those values, here are the behaviors we look for, and here's some examples of what we've seen on site. All of a sudden, people start to embrace, embody, and really make them part of what they do.
Love it.
The second question I asked Chris was, who carries the torch for your desired culture? This turned out to be a very revealing question, and for most leaders, we probably need to consider that. His answer was mostly him.
Yeah.
I'm carrying mostly that, and so we realize that's an action we need to take in his culture development. That's why him not being present would allow others to undermine the culture. But if he can have culture carriers, not just him, but his senior team, his supervisors, all the way down to who's managing the front line, are we all supporting that? How do you develop these culture carriers?
That's a critical question. I think that is absolutely what has to happen in order for the culture to be sustainable over time. And so you have to be very intentional about pouring into and developing your leadership team, or those that work directly with you that will be boots on the ground more than you will. And so a couple of questions for you around this for you to think about as you're listening today is, do your senior leaders have a voice in developing the culture? Do you allow that, or do you try to control that? That may be another episode, another podcast we ought to do. Yeah. The second question is, do your senior leaders know the behaviors expected that support your core values? And then the third question is, do your senior leaders catch people exhibiting or not exhibiting these behaviors? And so do they have the voice of them? Do they know them? And then do they catch people doing them and talk about it and share the stories, as we had mentioned just a minute ago?
That's fantastic. And that's exactly the action Chris took as we wrapped up our coaching call, is that he wants to make sure he's not the only person that's walking around with an eye for finding examples of what it means to live out these core values and to really promote intentionally this culture that they've designed. And he knows that he really wants people to know that it's easy to make you think. I actually ask this question a lot: who's responsible for culture in your organization? Is it John Maxwell? Well, definitely John sets a culture, and Mark Cole, definitely Mark has a voice in designing the culture. But at my level in here, I kind of look to you, and then to your level, you kind of look to Mark and thinking, who's responsible?
Yeah,
I think we every leader is responsible for what it feels like to work in your.
No doubt, I agree, and that goes back to even just an engagement level. I've read a study, and where it says, hey, the engagement level of team members, the same as culture, is directly tied to your supervisor, your leader. And to your point, right? Like I report directly to Mark Cole. My engagement level is his responsibility. It's not John. It's not John Maxwell's. And that happens all the way throughout an organization. So, all right, Coach, I'm going to put you on the spot. So you're working with Chris through this. You guys are having conversations about it. Give us some applicable, some action items, some things that Chris did as he began thinking about who is going to carry the torch of the culture inside our organization.
Well, to compliment him, he recognized it immediately that there's behaviors happening that are not consistent with the culture that we've established. So first thing he did was he met with his senior team and reviewed the core values. These cannot be viewed as something that was on a poster on the wall, on a coffee mug, or on a T-shirt. These have to be real things that we live by. He then reviewed with each of the leaders not only what are the core values, but what are the definitions and what are the behaviors that we want to see with that. And he said he went around the room and he began to really ask each individual person, how do you see this? What are some examples of that? He asked every leader to spend, I used the example a minute ago, 2 minutes. He said 2 to 5 minutes at the front of every team meeting or team huddle. In his business, they gather every day, but he said at least once a week they spend a couple of minutes sharing examples. So he said you're going to have to be intentional looking for, they had 4 core values that they wanted to have. I'm looking for examples of one of those 4 every week. We start to share that. And he said that there's something that we do well. He said, I'm getting people now to start sharing stories. Someone did something, and we want to capture that and begin to have those stories being shared among the organization. So it actually sounds pretty simple. They confirmed the core values. They confirmed the behaviors of the definitions and behaviors. They committed that they would start looking for examples. They would share those. And one thing he brought up is we also find examples of them not living up to. So if you,
which is good because they're
back
aware.
To a previous podcast about do you critique someone in public or private? He said taking someone aside to say that's not how we do things here. So and then asking them how would our culture, what would it require of us in that situation I just witnessed.
That's good.
And so holding people accountable to living by not just catching positive stories, which you hope they do, but also holding them accountable if there are negative stories that are happening there.
I think what you laid out and what you're walking through with Chris is simple but not easy. And I love the action steps that he's taking. It is so important as you bring on new team members to think about the impact of your culture. And you've got to be intentional about it. I'll close with this. This also comes from, Greg, our one of our facilitators on the culture piece, the 4 dimensions of culture, where he talks about how do you think, act, and interact, right? And so when you begin thinking about that, that's not only relevant for you as a leader, but your leadership team.
That's good. Yeah.
And then they do the same thing, but it goes right back to the values and the behaviors, and then catch them in the act, and then tell the story. And when you do that, and you're repetitive with it, then it'll be sustainable over time.
Fantastic.
Here's a question for you. How can we ensure that we have a culture of authenticity that promotes that psychological safety for the team to be able to do this, to be able to bring bad news to the leaders, whether you're the leader or you're a team member?
Yeah, it's an interesting word, psychological safety. We've talked about it either last week or the week before. I think it's come up. It comes up a lot right now. Is it okay? Can you handle it if I come in? Is it safe to tell you bad news? Is it safe to challenge you? Is it safe to dissent? How do you handle things like that? So thinking about, for me, I'll lay out a few things, but number one was, are you exhibiting vulnerability, or are you promoting a spirit of perfectionism? And this word vulnerability in leadership is kind of the rage right now, to say, are you being vulnerable? And most people, when I ask in groups, I say, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I say vulnerable. They say weak. And I thought, isn't that the way we've been trained? But it really is. If you've seen it, it's 100% courage. And so I really want leaders to be thinking about, how do I create an environment where people feel comfortable sharing setbacks, mistakes, failures? Is that, am I sharing setbacks, mistakes, and failures? Am I being vulnerable? A vulnerable act by a leader is saying, I don't know. I made a mistake. I really messed that up. Can you help me? Boy, I missed that. And instead of acting like we've got it all going together, when I do that, I'm like, show you I don't have all the answers. Although if you press me, I always have an answer.
Yeah.
But I don't have to always have the answer. And can I demonstrate it's okay to take a risk and tell me about the mistakes you made, because I'm going to tell you about mine?
I love that you said that, and I think it's worth repeating. Vulnerability is not a weakness, and we probably grew up thinking that. Maybe some cultures, lean more towards that than others, but it is not a weakness. And I've heard you use this kind of, analogy before, and I love it, where you say, hey, it definitely requires courage to open the curtain and allow people to see kind of the backstage act of what's really going on. So many of us, though, we just want to have that front stage set where people can see all buttoned up. I kind of relate this to that. I shouldn't say there's not a whole lot of vulnerability going on social media. No. And there may be some. There may be some. Yeah, a small percentage. Yeah.
If you see one, show me.
But yeah. But man, it's that everybody wants that. The front of the curtain, the where the front stage act is all clean and buttoned up, and that is not life. By the way, that is not leading. That is not influencing. And so we want our team to see our mistakes and our faults, and that they know that we need their help, and then hopefully that is then reciprocated with them as well as part of those team dynamics.
Yeah, and I appreciate that metaphor. For me, it is a front stage act. Social media, everybody puts forward the front stage act. The curtains are closed behind them. You can't see the backstage disaster that may be going on, but we all have a backstage act. And so just being able to show that. Brene Brown said something that resonated with me about that we like for people to think we're perfect, but we ourselves don't really like perfect people. And so we're trying to, we want to look that way, but we don't like people who are trying to look that way. And so for me, when you stop putting on the perfect act, you become more authentic, more real, and I can relate to you more. And Brene Brown says people can say, "Oh, me too." If people are saying "me too," that's a beautiful thing. They said, "I really messed that up." Oh, me too.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden now we're sharing on a level that we can actually help each other grow. At least number 2 was that, are you encouraging open communication among people on the team? And open communication, I think, begins with actively listening to the people on the team, really encouraging the conversation. It's okay to be open. It's okay to share on the team. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think when you say active listening, the key there is that word active, right? So that encourages the listener to ask for additional context, be curious about the points of view that they're hearing and that they're discussing, and then allow space for you guys to kind of share each other's ideas and additional thoughts. I think that's the key to active listening. And listening is the number one way for you to show that you value people. I think the greatest compliment you could receive is someone's like, man, no matter what's going on around in the environment, like when I'm having a conversation with so-and-so, they're like there's nothing else going on. Like they're dialed in and they are listening. And I think that makes your team, your people, feel valued. I think it also opens the door, listening does, for you to exhibit curiosity. This is a word that has come about more and more. We've talked about it on previous podcasts, but man, when you're curious and open to learning new things, I think there's nothing but good things that can come out of that when you're connecting with your people.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I think about, number 3 would be, do your teammates feel empowered to make decisions and take ownership of their work? And the opposite of that to me is really micromanaging. And if you're micromanaging it, the one message that gives, somebody's trying to micromanage my work, it speaks of lack of trust. And if trust is in question, then this whole idea of psychological safety is going to be in question. So I'm looking for ways to ensure my teammates, if they're going to tell me hard things, they have to know that they are in control of their work and that I expect them to be empowered. And there's a lot we probably got a podcast on being empowered, but that there's a lot goes into that. Are people prepared? Are they skilled? Have they been developed and equipped to be empowered? But once they are, it gives a certain level of trust. It said, I can come to you. I trust you. You believe in me. I'm going to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I also want to encourage leaders, as you're thinking through this, to have consistency in the way that you lead people, the way that you communicate with people. I think a lot of us at times, when there is bad news, we react and we get to a place where we're displaying our emotions versus delaying them and walking through that process. I'll actually give you an example, just a leadership conversation I was having this week around what you're talking about, and then around these emotions. We've talked about psychological safety and making decisions, whether it leads to good news or bad news. And I have a team member where I think they were just in a place where they were stuck. And I think they were stuck because they were afraid to move the ball forward or make a decision that then would create a bad situation that then they would have to come share with the team. And it was bad news. And so one of the things I did just recently was had a conversation and said, okay, here's the deal. For 2 weeks, I don't want you to seek anybody else's input. I just want you to make decisions and go. And I said, here's what I want you to know. No matter what you mess up, if you mess up anything, I fully stand behind everything that you are going to do. And you could see the weight being lifted off on there because of the pressure and the weight of, again, I allow people to bring me bad news, but they don't necessarily want to bring you bad news. So how do you set that up? And I was empowering, to your point number 3, that leader to say, hey, for 2 weeks, don't ask anybody else. Don't come to me and ask my opinion. Like, go, make decisions. You're empowered to do it. And by the way, I believe in you. And if you mess up and something bad news comes, that doesn't matter. Just let's have a conversation about it, and I fully support you. And so I think by that empowerment that you were just talking about, that reminded me of kind of that conversation that I had with them this week, and just wanted to kind of share that with those that are listening.
Oh, that's great. And I think you're really doubling down on the point that if I feel empowered by you and that I have that trust with you, I don't want to I don't want you to be surprised. Go back to your
Yeah.
unwritten rules card. Is that I totally want you to be in the know because you believe in me. You've given me the freedom, the power. You've empowered me. I don't want you to get caught by surprise. So I'm going to tell you the truth and not wait for you to be surprised. Number 4, I love this about just ensure you have a growth mindset and you're promoting a growth mindset on your team. Versus a fixed mindset. Fixed mindset people don't believe they can grow and change. They tend to not take the risk. They don't want to let their faults be known. They limit how they participate. A growth mindset person is learning and growing, tries new things, fails, gets up, tries another thing, fails, gets up. They don't take failure as it's an event, not a person. And to a fixed mindset person, failure is a person. And so I'm going to maybe as a fixed mindset person, put up a block, put up a wall. I'm not going to share things. I don't want to reveal that I don't have what it takes. A growth mindset person knows they have what it takes, but they're probably going to get knocked down a time or two, and they're going to continue to learn, grow. And I just find them to be more open and honest about what they're going through versus having that fixed mindset.
Well, for those of us that are avid listeners, we are now back on the average of Perry bringing us 5 points per podcast.
I was going to ask you where number 5 was.
If you missed last episode, I want to encourage you to go back and listen to that because Perry brought us 6 points. I was a little disappointed. Now he brought us 4, so we're back on average. He did bring that to my attention.
Thanks for noticing.
Jake, we'll invite him back the next time. I love what you said about this. This is a value of ours, right? Like at Maxwell Leadership, this is something that we value. And I just want to encourage you that I don't think we grow without being able to receive bad news.
That's really good.
I think back now. Listen, that's not all true because there are certain things that we are intentionally and we grow and all stuff. I think about the greatest lessons that I've grown through and learned from. It usually started off with some bad news, and so man, just think about that. What Perry was talking about this growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and know that failure is going to happen. And people are going to have to bring you bad news. You're going to have to share bad news. By the way, here's a tip. If you have to go share bad news, share it, right? Be very vulnerable, transparent about it, but share what you've learned from that bad news already and some things that you're working on. I think that news will probably be received a lot better and help your leader maybe kind of delay their emotions if you come in like that. And I just think that's key to understand that bad news is coming. It reminds me of your title, Tuesdays Are Coming. Bad news is coming. So how do we receive that? What do we learn from it? How do we go from it? Because we do want to have that growth mindset. Well, as I wrap up, just real quick, the 4 points that Perry brought to us this week is, are you exhibiting vulnerability and promoting a spirit of perfectionism? Number 2, are you encouraging open communication among the people on your team? Number 3, another area to consider is if your teammates feel empowered to make decisions and take ownership of their work. And then finally, what we just talked about in regards to, we want to make sure that we're ensuring that we have a growth mindset on our team and with yourself. Well, as we get started today, I want to talk a little bit about this title. And this is interesting in just the time that we're in today. And the title that Perry's bringing to us is your team concerned about their future? Not the future of the organization. Maybe that's part of it, but their future. And a couple of weeks ago, we talked a little bit about how leaders can create and maintain urgency. And one of the things is we talked in that episode, and I'd encourage you to go back and listen to it, is we talked about how do you create that culture? What does that look like? How do you go about it the right way? Because if you don't, what's going to end up happening is you're going to risk creating a culture of fear and anxiety about why is there's so much urgency around what we're doing. Add to that the market conditions and with people quitting. And I saw an article the other day. I even shared this with you. Now it's fast quitting and all these different phrases are coming out. There are definitely concerns by our team members, about their future, about their leaders' future, about the organization maybe. And so today we want to talk about some ways to avoid creating a culture of fear and anxiety inside the organization while still trying to create that urgency.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would disagree. There's a lot going on in the economy and in the world and business. Is it a recession? Is it not a recession? I mean, there's lots of dynamics that are affecting people. I found in my coaching lately a lot of leaders, and I also coach some young people, just part of the joy that I get out of coaching. But there's a lot of anxiety, and what you hear a little bit in the press about the Gen Z and the anxiety, stress and anxiety they feel. But I think some leaders are feeling this as well as they lead those younger generations. So, I'm reminded, and I remind myself when I'm tempted to fear things, is that I control the controllables. Control what you can control, for the most part, anxiety is related to trying to control things we can't control, like the things I just mentioned. So I think step one for any leader trying to increase urgency while reducing fear, anxiety with people is to remind everyone to what it is we actually can control in the business. And so a lot of time that's going to come down to our thoughts, our attitudes, our actions, things that are within our reach in doing that. But I think the degree of empowerment that we talked about in the urgency podcast, that a member on your team feels, how empowered they feel, can directly affect how anxious and fearful they may feel. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the more that you empower, the more, to your point, they feel like they can control their own situation and the things that are around that situation. As you were talking, it reminded me of a saying from Coach Bill Belichick, the great New England Patriot coach, where you can hear him on different clips for leadership videos where he talks about do your job, right? Like do your job. Now, and then Nick Saban says it because he comes obviously from that coaching tree. And that's in essence what they're saying is, hey, there are 11 of us on the field at one time, and we have a lot of urgency. There's a lot of urgency in the game of football. We can get anxious about this. There can be fear about things not working. Don't worry about what's going on next to you, what's going on in the backfield. Like, do your job, to your point. Control what you can control. Empower them to be able to do that. The team that you're working with, they're not just sitting and waiting around for you or other senior leaders to decide. When you empower them, you allow them to have the autonomy to do their job. They can move quickly. Oftentimes, they'll be able to do it without baggage of fear that may be created because of you as your leader if you don't empower them, or uncertainty and doubt. And so I love the fact that we're talking about this again because it is something from a leadership standpoint that's not talked about enough.
Last week we talked a lot about communication. Do you think how a leader communicates affects positively or negatively
100%
how anxiety is felt on the
100%.
team?
Yeah, 100%. I think when your team knows that through transparency, how you're communicating, they can read that, they can feel that. And I think even if I remember during certain times that we've all been through in the last 3 years, I remember Andy Stanley saying something that really stuck with me, where he said, your team doesn't necessarily care what you're saying, although they do. They just want to hear your voice in times like that. And so your voice, whether it's calm, whether it is anxious, like they're going to feel that. They're going to read off of that, and then they're going to act. They're going to follow because it's contagious. You put here in the notes, I think it's great just to talk about, a lot of people have seen this movie where, hey, if you are able to communicate calmly when things are critical, there's deadlines, if things are urgent and circumstances, it's super important to be able to do that. And one of the things you put in my notes here was, hey, think about Apollo 13 in the movie, right? Where, Tom Hanks is like, chaos is going on. And he's like, Houston, we have a problem. I was like, man, that's not how I would be. I would not be communicating it that calm.
I love that scene because they're screaming at each other, screaming, and they turn on the radio. Hello, Houston.
Yeah.
It comes very calm.
Yes.
All of a sudden that they do that. Well, calm is contagious. And I love that when people are watching, the team is watching you all the time, that they're in your level of anxiety so you should avoid allowing your level of anxiety and stress to communicate that to the team. But I think about Coach John Wooden had a statement. He actually has a book titled this as well. But how he could have easily have been the screaming, demanding coach. We've all worked for that. I know you and I played ball, and you always ran across that screaming, yelling, stress and building coach that was always on top of you. But Wooden was not that way. He was calm, and his demeanor was always level. And he said, "I need you to be quick, but don't hurry. Be quick, but don't hurry." And I love that
good.
about, can we, there's a difference between rushing and hurry and that stress and anxiety that people may be feeling in today's environment. And we need to have urgency, but it's not a false urgency. It's not a fake, it's not a stress-inducing urgency. It's just we need to be quick, don't hurry. And I think that's something we could use.
Including video lessons from John Maxwell, all at your fingertips. Available in our Maxwell Leadership app or online, you'll be coached by many well-known leadership experts that will help you achieve your growth goals. You can even listen to this podcast right there in the app. Check it out for free today at growth.maxwellleadership.com. That's growth.maxwellleadership.com.
Going back to communication, I've worked with leaders who just want to speed up and do things more quickly, but we really didn't know what that meant or why. And so I think leaders need to focus on communications to be clear about the why. We mentioned that on the urgency podcast as well, but if you're not communicating clearly and calmly, concisely about what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, where we are, how we're doing, that people begin to let that anxiety, I'm watching you and you look calm and we're okay. We're okay. And even though it's trying times and some clients are holding back budgets because they're waiting to see. I got news for you. Next year's an election year. It's probably going to get worse because there's going to be all kind of dynamics entering into that.
Yeah. I think as our team, if they can stay focused, they know what needs to be done, and they have that confidence, I love that. They can be quick without hurry. We haven't talked about the role of accountability in a while on some of our conversations when it comes to leadership in general, but specifically today, let's talk a little bit about it when it comes to increasing or decreasing fear or anxiety. What are your thoughts about that, and how does this tie into what we're talking about today?
Yeah, great question. And I was raised, probably you might have been as well, that accountability was, who do we blame when something goes wrong?
Yeah,
who's
right.
accountable for this? I want to know right now who's accountable for this.
Who's choked? Who do I need to get a hold of to choke? Yeah.
And I find that does nothing but raise anxiety and pushes people away. So I became enamored with an idea of making accountability about ownership. And I had a little saying, and I picked it up from some authors, the guys that wrote the Oz Principle, had this little, they didn't write it this way, but the way I loved it, I took away from that was that it's a personal choice that you make to rise above the circumstances. And there's always circumstances. And that's what we're talking about. There's circumstances going on, but can you just make a choice to rise above the circumstances, to take ownership, to demonstrate, they use the word demonstrate ownership to drive the outcome that we want. And when I had those four things in my head about, I'm going to make a personal choice, or the people on my team making a personal choice, I need them to rise above the circumstances. I don't need excuses. There's always circumstances. There's always reasons why it won't work. Rise above it, and then know that you own it. Yeah. Whatever we're talking about, you're the owner, and we're going to drive that outcome. I'm here to help you. We can do all the coaching and we can do all that, but I need to know that you own it. That's accountability to me now. That's when good. I teach it with my teams is, they know, and can I look at them saying, wow, they're demonstrating ownership. I think you look at me sometimes and you have a deadline, we have a course, we have a something, and you look and you say, is Perry demonstrating ownership of that process? And then you know that that's accountability. Perry's holding himself accountable, you're holding me accountable, and we can move forward with that. But I think it's so huge to letting go of a lot of the anxiety was if we're taking ownership.
I love that word of ownership. We, on our leadership team at Maxwell Leadership, we model something very similar to that, which is, okay, great, let's talk about what the issues are, what the opportunities are, what the projects are. But before we're done with that conversation, there's one question, which is, who's owning this? Mm-hmm. And in essence, that's what you're saying. That's the accountability. At the end of the day, we could have 4 or 5 of us on a project, but Perry is the owner. When it comes to the accountability, we're looking at Perry, even though everybody else is involved in kind of helping that leader focus on removing obstacles, whatever it might be, to get to that outcome. But ultimately, Perry's the owner behind it.
And then we report every Monday morning to the team on how we're doing.
On how you're doing
where you
about
need help. And
right.
So you're accountable even that.
And that creates that great team peer-to-peer accountability as well. And so, if the people on your team know that they own an outcome, if they know why that outcome is important, if they are empowered to drive that outcome, if they can control what they can control, then stress, anxiety, and fear should not have a place in that environment. Will there be urgency? Will there be tension at times? Sure. I know, Patrick Lencioni talks about tension and the power of that in meetings and in conversation. That's going to happen. But we think that we can reduce the stress, the anxiety, and the fear by going about it how we're talking about today.
Yeah, well said. I never met a leader, not one, who wanted to cause fear and uncertainty. I may have met a couple that wanted to raise the level of urgency and tension a bit, and using that positively. But most of us don't want to make things worse for our team. So just because you feel like you're okay doesn't mean everyone's okay. So I think paying attention, being intentional, communicating, transparency, a lot of the things that we talked about here today can help people feel like their future is not so much in jeopardy. And we can control the controllables. There are going to be things that happen, but we can control what we can control and focus on that and reduce that anxiety level.
Whether your organization or your team is thriving or whether you're working, through the valley right now, there needs to be urgency inside that organization and inside the team. What we want you to hear us say is that urgency doesn't equal anxiety. And you need to really truly understand that and the difference between that, because your team, if it comes across as anxiety and fear versus going after deadlines and urgency, then they are going to be concerned about their future. And man, as soon as, almost kind of like you teach in team member engagement, where we have the 5 people in the middle of the boat, if those 5 people, they can go either way, right? They can either kind of fall into the urgency side of the things and man, my future's bright and we're going to get after it. Or they could go the other way and they could be having conversations with people that are in the back of the boat. And all of a sudden there's fear and there's anxiety and they're concerned about their future. And what ends up happening is not only do you get decreased engagement from your team member if you don't handle this properly, but you also begin to lose people out the back door. And if you haven't done research lately on what it costs organizations to lose people out the back door and then replace them, just Google that, and then you'll understand how important this is.
I ask you a question. Thinking about, is my future secure? How are we doing? Do I have a future here? Or how are we doing? I know we do a lot about where are we. You do a lot of our business review meetings. Talk about compared to our goal, compared to last year. What's your feeling about anxiety increasing or anxiety reducing? There's no right or wrong answer here. I watch our team and I know that a lot of things that causes anxiety is I don't know how we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think in our team, there's no mistake on how we're doing. And you're very direct and you put the numbers up for everybody to see every Monday morning. We know what the progress is. We know where we should be. We know where we were this time last year. Does that help or hurt?
I can't answer that question. I'm just kidding on this live podcast. Here's what I'm going to tell you. What I was thinking about when you said that was, I think it helps some people. I think it causes anxiety in other people.
Good. I think that too.
So let me tell you how I handle that. I'm very aware of the individuals on our team that it causes anxiety. It's okay that it does because of how they're naturally wired. It's not okay if I, as a leader, allow that to continue to happen without talking about it. So I'll give you, this is a great question and a great example. We had a meeting yesterday where I brought my sales team in and we started talking about Q3 and Q4 and what's in the pipeline and what's on the books and what can we, anticipate in Q4. And we're having these conversations. And one of the team members who is a phenomenal leader on our team, that causes some anxiety. And so what I did was started the meeting by saying, hey, I thought about having this meeting one-on-one and individually. But I decided that I felt like it would be better for us all to have a conversation so that we can all learn from each other on how we approach our book of business and the numbers and where we're at and what do we need to do as a team going forward. Now, I didn't have to have this conversation with the individual that doesn't, on my team, that doesn't get anxious about reporting numbers on stuff, but I'm very aware of. So I guess what I'm saying is that as leaders, you're going to have all kinds of people, right? And everybody, we talk about everybody deserves to be led well. And if that's the case, the only way to be able to do that is to truly know and understand the wiring and the heartbeat of your people, and to communicate that, to talk about it, to be like, hey, I know this may make you feel uncomfortable, but this is not personal. I want you to learn from this. We're going to grow together. And then maybe pipe down the other side, balance that care and candor, but also everyone's not going to receive it the same way, but it's our job as a leader to make sure that we understand that and walk them through that.
So as we wrap up, I'll wrap it up. I think that's strong. What you just said is that, and I just learned something new as well, that being transparent as a leader is part of your job, to let people know where we are, how we stand.
Absolutely.
Do we have a future? Are we safe? Hey, they need to know. But I love we always talk, you have to lead everybody individually. Where do they need? So you identified as a leader, your team well enough to know that certain people are going to struggle with that. Certain people are going to take it and study it, and certain people don't care.
Yeah.
They're just going to go about their business.
That's right.
They're going to control their controllables, not the bigger picture. So what I took away from that is that know your team, be transparent, be open and honest, get as much data in front of people as possible, then realize who you need to go work on the side with to help ease their fear, anxiety, uncertainties, that this is what the market's doing. This is where we are. This is how we're doing, but here's how you're going to help that.
Great.
And I go back to what their role in it is, how relevant they are, what they need to do, why they need to keep moving quickly. I think those all play into that at the same time. Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.